So my collection of poetry is, a lot of it's quite sad because it's people no longer alive, aunts, my parents moving into nursing homes. I'm going to start with a couple of poems about the couple on the centre of the book. It's Muriel and Lionel, my father's eldest sister and her husband. So, her last cigarette. And so it was, the day after her 10-hour honeymoon, Muriel awoke alone in the eaves of her father's house. She pulled on her clothes and slipped off her wedding ring, leaving it in the ashtray on the bedside table of polished walnut. She went to work in the fields as her husband sailed on the tide. God rays striped the room with dust particles and talcum powder, vapours of eau de cologne, lavender and de Maurier. On the eve of her 80th birthday, she smoked her last cigarette and slowly climbed the ladder to the loft. She slipped off her wedding ring, leaving it in the ashtray on the bedside table edged with cigarette burns. Slipping between the sheets of unfulfilled dreams and faded memories, she took her final breath and exhaled into the dust particles which escaped through the skylight and into the night air. It's really quite sad for my Auntie Muriel, because I don't know if any of you know about Sark. She lived on Sark all her life. It's an island without cars. And she'd had a fall, and a social worker turned up from Guernsey, the neighbouring island, and looked at her house. They had a sort of ladder up to the sleeping platform, no bathroom, outside loo, and they said, "I'm sorry, we can't let you live like this anymore." And I think she just took the decision if she couldn't live there, she wouldn't live anywhere. So this is about Muriel and her husband. So, Muriel and Lionel. Muriel caresses the barnacled hand, the tremors subsides. Do you remember summers long ago when the skies were always a cloudless blue? We'd freewheel down the harbour hill, glide into the water at dusk and swim out to your little boat. There we'd be rocked by lapping waves or the movement of an undulating swell. On moonless nights we lay naked, gazing at the stars, waking to the lilac sky before dawn, plunging into the water and hurrying home. Do you remember prawning in gullies and setting out spinners for mackerel? Oh, what about caving? The dripping crystalline ceilings, walls studded with sea anemones the size of small-fisted rubies. Harvest festivals, cider making, bonfires and barn dances, songs sung in the old language with accordion accompaniment. The cradle you crafted as a little boat on Crescent Moon rockers never held a child. The christening gown I stitched has been folded in tissue for 50 years, half a century. Do you remember, dear? Lionel shakes his head. I'm sorry, lass. You look familiar. Were you perhaps once a friend of my sister? Oh. So the Channel Islands are quite a rich history. I think a lot of people think they're closer to England, but they're tucked into the coast of France. This is called Temps Passé. Centuries ago, farmers and fishermen left their bean crock in the embers of the oven to return to a hearty meal at the end of the day. Dried beans hung from the rafters, shaken from their papery husks, soaked overnight and placed in a large pot with onions, garlic, a pig's trotter or beef, covered in water, stock, and cooked overnight or throughout the long day. A cabbage loaf accompaniment, crusty bread baked between brassica leaves to prevent burning should the baker become distracted, and thickly spread with mother's home-churned butter. 500 years ago, farmers planted their crops in the spring, prayed in the fisherman's chapel and set sail across the Atlantic. Currents took them to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, the Gaspé Peninsula. They created an industry far from home. Fishermen, crew, coopers and gutters, dryers and salters, clerks and storemen. Names taken across the Atlantic in the 16th century endure to this day. Salt cod, their precious cargo in hot barrels in the hold, transported to the good Catholics of the Indies and Europe, to be sold or bartered for teas, silks, cottons and spices. Men in a race against tide and trade winds to return to their beloved Channel Islands across the Atlantic just in time for the harvest. My parents were children during the German occupation of the Channel Islands and were extremely thrifty. Nothing ever goes to waste, and in clearing the house, I think they've saved every piece of string, every margarine tub, like 60 years of hoarding trying to sort through. So this poem is called Thrift. Mother's everlasting chicken, roast on Sunday, cold cuts with salad on Monday, casserole remains on Tuesday, curried tiny chicken shreds on Wednesday, bones boiled for soup on Thursday, just in time for conger eel steaks on Friday. No, don't pull that face. Baked in the Aga, dotted with butter, drizzled with cream, and sprinkled with marigold petals when in season. Auntie's Infinity War creations, seamless miracles knitted on circular needles. A pullover for her husband, cabled with ropes and anchors, leather-patched elbows, blanket-stitched hems, then unravelled to make school jumpers, remnants crocheted into Red Cross blankets, pom-poms for woolly hats and tiny little scraps for the cat to play with. Grandpa's self-renewing garden, open trench composting, none of you modern rotating plastic bin lark, dig a spit, chuck your peelings in it, cover with soil and repeat. Keep back a handful of beans to sow next season. Tomato seeds too, why buy them, waste of packaging, pay postage, you're nuts. You must have money to burn. Take a cutting, divide a root, give sunflowers as a gift. Water, water everywhere, we're surrounded by this stuff. A moody brine ebbs and flows. Have a bath? You must be joking. A whole month's drinking water down the plug hole? Mustn't waste it. Here, wash in this bowl and empty it on the beans. Do the dishes in the sink and use the water on the rhubarb. Soapy suds keep aphids at bay. A machine to wash clothes, whatever next. Organic? You don't know the meaning of the word. So this one is serious thrift. Hedge-gathered wild garlic, blackberries on a hot sunny afternoon, sloes ready for pricking and drowning in gin, green filberts, picked before the squirrels squirrel them away, ripened in a box in the airing cupboard, medlars, forget about the jokes about their appearance, they're as prized as truffles, bletted, no pigs required in the search. Go to the beach we go with a net and some buckets, a bag of coarse salt and a sharp penknife, whelks, fishy chewing gum, winkles and clams, razorfish magic, they rise vertically from the sand, a host of prawns, a scattering of limpets, samphire and dulse, dandelion leaves. We spent a couple of summer afternoons foraging with the children, but dear God, my parents as children spent 5 years doing this every day, rain or shine. Tante Marianne tied fine nets between trees to capture songbirds, 60 roasted in a tray, meat eaten, bones boiled for gruel. It's how they survived the occupation all those years ago. Harvesting. You would not believe it. My mother systematically scours the table at jumble sales, buying things that I know aren't in her size. Then, at home, the harvesting begins. Starting with buttons, if not for a garment of her own, they're neatly stitched onto small pieces of card to be sold at charity sales. She has an eye for design and pattern. A blouse or a dress which has gone out of fashion can be reborn with a contrast collar, cuffs, hem or pockets. Nothing is wasted is her mantra. Attractive old plates for edible gifts, vintage saucers when giving a plant, dainty teacups for candles and pincushions, any decorative containers for planting herbs with a handwritten recipe attached, tiny scraps of fabric for patchwork, doll's clothes, rag rugs, cupboard buttons. It pains her to see anything heading for the bin. Fragments too small, damaged or moth-eaten, well, they make the best firelighters of all. When writing another poem about Sark, I thought there was a place there which is quite unique, called the Fat Man's Misery, but actually I found out that it's a geographical term. So this is a prose poem, Fat Man's Misery. "This can't be the way," I said to my friend as we peeked over the edge of the cliff, and yet we were with a recommended local guide. Before we set off, he looked me up and down. I must confess I was not exactly slender then, but maybe a little less rounded than now. Did he wonder if the rope would bear my weight? Well, it did. Over the edge of the headland we went, slipping into a crevice like a lazy eyelid in the rock. Crawl and drop through tunnels and chimneys, the sound of water, tidal, dripping, tumbling, the smell of the sea. A turquoise light reflected with gold into the cave. It made judgment deceptive. The stepping stone just below the surface left me thigh-deep in water. Stalactites appeared to be within reach, but were elusively a stretch too far. Stripes on stones became alive when wet. Long strands of seaweed snaked in the shadows. Daydreaming in the subterranean world, I was suddenly brought to my senses as the sea breached the mouth of the cave with a gush. Rushing in, it almost swept me off my feet. The guide beckoned. In panic, we followed. I feared we would drown, but there, at the back of the rock, was a narrow crevasse, the fat man's misery. Would I fit through? Breathing in to make me thin. That you're reading this poem proves that I did. I'll just read this one, the last one. One of my great pleasures when I'm in the Channel Islands is swimming. And in my teenage years, before the Channel Islands had things like indoor pools, we all did long distance swimming. It was like swimming from one bay to another or halfway around the island. So I've never had a fear of swimming in deep water or in the dark. So this is In Search of the Perseids. Dark, dark as darkness, blindly into the night we go, abandoning our clothes along with our inhibitions. Bare feet engulfed by sharp wet shingle, staggering like drunkards to the water's edge. The beach slopes steeply and deeply into the water we glide, anaesthetised by the cold, but exhilarated and smiling for no reason. Far, further, far away from the shore we swim in search of the Perseids, eyes focused on the billion and more stars above us, oblivious to underlying currents, watching, waiting, searching for a movement, a flash, a streak, a tail of bright white light. Then, on the horizon, a blood-orange orb emerges from the sea and ascends, turning golden. We gasp at the spectacle, and when your hand reaches out to me beneath the surface, capturing for eternity the meteor's reflection within a cloud of bubbles, my eyes are fixed on the sky above, and when I turn, you have gone.